When I shut off the water on my own ranch for routine repairs, I didn't expect flashing lights at my gate, until an HOA Karen called 911 and told dispatch I was committing a crime on my own land. I shut off my water the same way I'd done a dozen times before, a slow twist of the main valve, a brief hiss in the pipes, then silence. Out on a ranch, that kind of thing is routine. Lines freeze, fittings crack, pumps need work. You don't call anyone. You just handle it. That morning, the sun was barely over the tree line, burning off the last wisps of fog that drifted up from the creek. I had the gate open, tools laid out on the tailgate, and a trench half dug where a section of old pipe had finally given up. The ranch was quiet in the way only rural land can be, no traffic, no neighbors in sight, just wind whispering through the grass and the distant lowing of cattle. Then I heard sirens. At first, I didn't even register them as being for me. Sirens happen on highways, in towns, on other people's property. They don't usually come rolling down a private dirt road that ends at your front gate. But they were getting closer. My chest tightened as I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. I watched as a sheriff's SUV appeared at the bend, followed by a second vehicle. Dust kicked up behind them as they pulled right up to my gate, lights flashing like I'd robbed a bank instead of fixing plumbing. 2 deputies stepped out, hands resting near their belts, scanning the property like they expected trouble. "Sir," one of them called out, "are you the owner of this land?" "I am," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What's going on?" "We received a 911 call reporting illegal water shutoff, possible endangerment, and refusal to comply with HOA utilities regulations." I actually laughed. A short, disbelieving bark that sounded absurd even to my own ears. "You're joking," I said. "This is my well. My pump. My line." The deputy didn't laugh back. He pulled out a notepad, his face expressionless. "Caller claims you intentionally shut off water service to evade HOA oversight and are refusing to restore it." That's when it clicked and a cold wave of understanding washed over me. Karen. She lived nearly half a mile away, closer to the paved road and well within the part of the community the HOA liked to pretend extended all the way onto my land. Ever since I bought the ranch, she'd treated my property like an unfinished sentence, something the HOA would eventually get around to controlling. Apparently, today was her escalation. I walked them over to the pump house, anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. I opened the door with more force than necessary. Inside sat my private well system, exactly where it had been since before the HOA ever existed. No shared lines. No municipal hookup. No connection to anyone else's water but my own. "This is mine," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. I shut it off to replace a broken pipe. The deputies exchanged a look that said they were beginning to understand. Dispatch said the caller claimed this affected the community supply. "There is no community supply here," I said, the frustration bleeding into my words now. "And even if there were, I'm not part of it." They radioed in, confirmed the parcel number, and within minutes, the entire fabrication fell apart. My land wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. My water wasn't shared. There was no law, state, county, or otherwise, being violated. That should have been the end of it. But before they left, one of the deputies said something that stuck with me, his tone almost apologetic. "She sounded very convinced," he said. "Like she expected us to arrest you." I watched them drive away, dust settling back onto the road, and felt that familiar mix of irritation and disbelief churning in my gut. Most people would be embarrassed after pulling something like that. Karen wasn't most people. Less than an hour later, I got the first email from the HOA. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a clarification. It was a notice of concern, referencing reports of unauthorized infrastructure interference, and reminding me that cooperation maintains community harmony. My jaw clenched as I read it twice, then a third time, each word stoking the fire building inside me. That's when I realized this wasn't about water. It was about control. Karen hadn't called 911 because she thought I'd broken the law. She'd called because she believed the law would side with her simply because she demanded it to. And when that failed, the HOA was already lining up to try a different angle. Standing there in the quiet again, pipe replaced, water still off, one certainty crystallized in my mind. If they were willing to call the police over something this small, they weren't done. Not even close. I was tightening the last valve when I heard tires crunching on gravel. At first, I thought it was the plumber coming back with a missing part. Then I saw the dust plume rising higher than a pickup would kick up. 2 vehicles. One black and white. My stomach dropped. A sheriff's cruiser rolled up to my gate, lights flashing but no siren. Behind it, Karen's beige SUV crept forward like it was part of the operation. I stood there, wrench in hand, boots muddy, water still shut off at the main line. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but I forced myself to stay calm. The deputy stepped out slowly, hand resting near his belt, eyes scanning the property like he was expecting a meth lab instead of a half-dug trench and a ranch house that had been there since before the HOA existed. "Sir," he called out, his tone carefully neutral. "We got a report of illegal utility interference and possible endangerment." Karen got out of her SUV before he even finished the sentence. "That's him," she said loudly, pointing at me like I was a criminal. "He shut off the water to multiple homes. He's refusing to turn it back on. I told dispatch he might be unstable. Unstable. Because I turned off my own water." The word hung in the air like an accusation, and I felt my hands curl into fists around the wrench. The deputy looked from her to me, then back again. "Is that accurate, sir?" I took a breath, forcing my anger down. This was the moment where emotion could ruin everything. "No," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. "I shut off the main valve on my private well for repairs. My water does not supply any HOA homes. I'm not connected to their system at all." Karen scoffed, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "That's not true. We've always had access. The HOA has easement rights." "Easement rights don't include stealing water," I said, my voice hardening. "And they don't exist on paper." The deputy raised a hand. "Ma'am, let me handle this." He turned to me again, and I could see him reassessing the situation. "Do you mind if I take a look at the shutoff? Be my guest." I walked him over to the valve box, hyper-aware of Karen's eyes boring into my back. Everything was labeled, clean, professional. The permit tag was zip-tied to the pipe. The repair invoice was sitting on my tailgate. He crouched, examined the setup, nodded slowly. "This is a private well," he said, mostly to himself. "Yes, sir." Karen hovered behind him, arms crossed, radiating frustration. But when he shut it off, the clubhouse fountains stopped. I couldn't help it, I laughed once. Short. Sharp. The absurdity of it all finally breaking through. "That's because the HOA illegally tapped into my well line 3 years ago," I said. "I've been documenting it ever since." The deputy stood up, and I saw the shift in his expression. "Is that true, ma'am?" Karen's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again like a fish gasping for air. "We had verbal permission from the previous owner." I handed the deputy a folder I'd been carrying in my truck for months, waiting for exactly this moment. My hands were surprisingly steady. Inside were photos, dates, certified letters, unanswered cease and desist notices, and one particularly damning email from the HOA board president stating, "We'll continue using the line until forced otherwise." The deputy flipped through it, his movements slowing as the implications sank in. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "why did you call 911? She straightened, clinging to her narrative. "Because he was depriving residents of essential services." The deputy looked back at the trench, the pipe, the permits, then at Karen with something that might have been pity. "On his own property?" "Yes, but—" "Ma'am," he interrupted, firmer this time, "this is a civil matter at best. And from what I'm seeing, You may have misrepresented the situation to dispatch. Her face went red, and I felt a small surge of vindication. Are you saying I did something wrong? I'm saying, he replied evenly, that calling emergency services to resolve a private HOA dispute is not appropriate. Karen spun toward me, her mask of civility finally cracking. This isn't over. The deputy raised an eyebrow. Actually, it might be. He turned to me, and I saw respect in his eyes now. Sir, you're within your rights to shut off your water. Finish your repairs. If anyone interferes, call us. Then he looked at Karen, his voice taking on a warning edge. And ma'am, any further false reports could result in charges. Silence fell hard and heavy. Karen got back into her SUV without another word, gravel spraying as she peeled out. I watched her go, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The deputy lingered a moment. You might want a lawyer, he said quietly. Something tells me this isn't the last of it. I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. Already have one. As he drove away, I turned the wrench again. The pipe hissed, the valve seated clean, and somewhere in the HOA, fountains stayed dry, and panic was just starting to set in. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. None from the HOA. All from people who suddenly realized their lakefront paradise ran on water that no longer flowed. By 8 a.m., my lawyer, Mark, was standing at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a grin that told me everything I needed to know. The satisfaction I felt was almost dizzying. They panicked, he said. And panic makes people sloppy. Apparently, once the fountains dried up and the clubhouse restrooms were locked, the resort manager did what Karen should have done in the first place. He called the county utilities office. That's when the real problem surfaced. The HOA's lakeside resort wasn't just tapping into my private well. They'd never been legally connected to any approved water source. No municipal line. No commercial permit. No environmental impact clearance. They were operating entirely on borrowed water, mine. And the county did not find that amusing. By mid-morning, an inspector was at my gate. Unlike the deputy, he didn't come with lights or suspicion. He came with a tablet, a tape measure, and a tone that suggested someone else was already in serious trouble. Sir, he said, shaking my hand with a firmness that felt like an ally's grip, we're investigating an unpermitted commercial water supply tied to your parcel. Mind if I ask a few questions? I smiled, unable to hide my relief. I've been waiting 3 years for this conversation. I showed him everything. The photos of the illegal tap. The correspondence. The ignored cease and desist letters. The HOA email admitting continued use. He didn't interrupt once. Just listened, his expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence. When I finished, he looked up slowly. Do you know how many violations this represents? I stopped counting after the 3rd statute, I said. He let out a low whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. Commercial operation without a water permit. Unauthorized diversion. Environmental noncompliance. False reporting of utility infrastructure. He paused, looking at me with something like sympathy. That resort should have never opened. By noon, the county issued an emergency shutdown order. No water meant no guests. No guests meant no revenue. And no revenue meant the HOA board was suddenly very interested in amicable resolution. At 1:07 p.m., Mark forwarded me an email. Subject: Urgent discussion request. They wanted a meeting. Mark replied with a single sentence. All communication must be in writing. That didn't stop them from trying. Karen showed up again. This time, no police. No confidence. Just rage wrapped in desperation, and I could see the fear underneath it. She stopped at the gate, hands clenched on the steering wheel like she might drive straight through. You did this on purpose, she yelled across the fence, her voice cracking. I didn't move, keeping my expression neutral even as satisfaction bloomed in my chest. You're costing people their jobs, she continued, her desperation now fully visible. Families, Do you even care? I walked closer, staying on my side of the property line, measuring each step. I cared when I sent you certified letters, I said calmly. I cared when I asked you to disconnect illegally. I cared when you ignored me. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You could fix this right now. Yes, I said. By turning my water back on, for myself. Her face twisted with fury and fear. You know that's not what I mean. And you know, I replied, my voice cold now, that you built a resort you didn't have the right to operate. That's when she said the quiet part out loud. You don't understand how much money is at stake. I nodded slowly. Oh, I understand perfectly. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as an obstacle, but as a threat. A real one. You think you've won, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No, I corrected, feeling the weight of 3 years of frustration finally lifting. I think you've been exposed. She stormed off, tires spinning, dust hanging in the air long after she was gone. I stood there, watching until her vehicle disappeared, my heart still racing but my mind finally at peace. That afternoon, Mark called again. They're trying to claim historical access, he said, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. But they've got nothing. No easement. No deed language. No permits. What about the 911 call? I asked. He chuckled. Dispatch logged it as a false report. That deputy wrote notes. Very detailed notes. By evening, the county posted the closure notice at the resort entrance. Guests filmed it, uploaded it, commented. Speculation spread faster than the truth, but the truth didn't need help. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that night. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. Because by the time the sun set over the lake, casting long shadows across my repaired water line, one thing was clear to everyone involved. They hadn't lost water. They'd lost control. And the reckoning, legal, financial, and personal, was only just beginning. As darkness fell, I stood on my porch with a cold beer, looking out over land that was truly mine. For the first time in 3 years, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had finally turned. And this time, I wasn't the one drowning. By the time the dust settled, it was clear the HOA Karen had made a fatal mistake. Not legally fatal, but reputationally and strategically. The sheriff's deputies left my ranch that afternoon with their heads shaking, one of them muttering, I don't know why she thought this would work. I did know why. People like her had spent years being rewarded for escalating minor annoyances into full-blown crises. This time, though, she had crossed a line that even the HOA couldn't defend. Within 48 hours, I received an official notice from the county confirming what the deputies had already told me verbally. I was well within my rights to shut off my own water for maintenance. No violation. No citation. No investigation. The report also noted that the 911 call had been classified as non-emergency misuse of services. That single sentence changed everything. Karen didn't know it yet, but that classification meant her call was now part of a public record, and one the HOA wanted buried fast. The board president showed up at my gate 2 days later, unannounced, his tone far different from the smug emails I'd received in the past. He didn't threaten fines. He didn't mention bylaws. Instead, he asked if we could talk this out like neighbors. I invited him in. We sat on the porch overlooking the dry trench where the water line had been repaired. I explained, calmly and in detail, exactly what had happened. The planned shutoff, the notice I'd posted, the deputy's response, and the county's written confirmation. Then I slid a printed copy of the incident report across the table and watched his face tighten when he read the words misuse of emergency services. He asked what I wanted. I told him the truth. I wanted to be left alone. No more surprise inspections. No more harassment. No more weaponizing city services because someone didn't like how I ran my ranch. And if the HOA couldn't guarantee that, I was prepared to file a formal complaint with the county, and a civil claim for harassment. For the first time, he nodded without arguing. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down. She posted in the HOA group chat claiming I'd endangered the community and wasted police resources. That backfired spectacularly when another neighbor shared screenshots of the incident report and pointed out that she was the one flagged for abusing 911. The comments turned on her fast. People didn't like HOAs much to begin with, but they really didn't like someone dragging law enforcement into personal vendettas. A week later, I received a letter, this time certified, stating that the HOA would no longer involve itself in utility-related matters on my property and that any future disputes should be resolved through direct communication. Translation: they were backing off quietly and permanently. Karen never apologized. People like her never do. But she stopped calling. She stopped posting. And whenever she drove past my gate after that, she wouldn't make eye contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd tried to have me arrested for exercising a basic property right, and in doing so, she'd exposed exactly how far she was willing to go to control something that wasn't hers. The system she tried to exploit ended up protecting me instead. Out here on my ranch, the water flows again. The repairs held. And the silence, no sirens, no threats, no HOA emails, is louder than any apology could ever be. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight louder. It's to let them show everyone exactly who they are.